that's not super relevant. Yeah, fuck turfs, dude. I would say fuck turfs. But also, what I would say is, even if
That
it's
would be the intro.
yeah, fuck turfs, dude.
Fuck nerves.
Okay, welcome to the second episode of the Outspoken 101 podcast. So I'm Kyle. This is Bolo. Say hi.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
So today, what we're gonna talk about is AI, specifically Chat GPT, because Bolo and I have very different views about AI. I have very real concerns that it's going to do irreparable damage to the labor markets. Bolo thinks that we can adapt. I'm not sure that we can adapt fast enough. So that's our episode for today. Bolo, can you introduce your stance here?
Yeah, so I think that all companies or businesses or organizations who don't leverage technology or new technology will lag behind in the same way that like Kodak had access to digital cameras, but they didn't pursue it. And now Kodak's kind of dead, if not like complete.
Is it dead?
I think so, but assuming that it's not, digital pictures and photos have completely taken over. If not completely, it's dominating. And every company is using digital instead of the traditional photos. I think that also goes with the internet. There's a lot of fear about the internet. There's a lot of jobs that have been destroyed. And at the same time, it's not strategic for a business to not use the internet if it's available for them. So that's my stance on the issue. So therefore, I think I have transformed my fear into excitement.
Yeah. So my thinking here is AI has so much more potential to destroy jobs, even compared to the internet. Because with regard to Kodak and the shift between like analog cameras to digital cameras, it didn't destroy as many jobs and it didn't destroy it at the same pace. So the transition to digital cameras and digital photography in general was something that happened quite slowly. That's number one. So people had enough time to adapt. And secondly, what I think is, even if it did destroy some jobs, like you could not make a business that's about developing photos anymore, for example, I still think that there are some things that can replace that with similar levels of job creation, right? So for every photo development place that was destroyed by that shift, we got another digital photography place with more people like doing photo editing and stuff like that. Meanwhile, for AI, it's trying to say that it's a catch all. So it's not just affecting a lot of industries at once. The first problem is that it happens very fast. So people literally cannot retrain fast enough. And secondly, my other problem is you do not create the same number of jobs. So it's not that big of a creative destruction type thing. Because whereas in virtual photography, I would say it's probably equal. The jobs that are destroyed by AI are much more compared to the number of jobs created. Because the number of jobs that are created are just like prompt engineers, right? Yeah. So that's how I'd rebut you. What would you
Yeah,
say to
no,
that?
I think that's totally valid. And in a conversation setting like a podcast, the way I would respond to it is that you're correct that it will destroy jobs. For example, copywriters, digital designers. And it's happening very fast because like I've been doing my homework in terms of like how can I create a AI coach Bolo, and with a certain curriculum that's available and the way we could automate certain things, yeah, maybe me lecturing would be done by artificial intelligence soon, and that would like really harm my capacity to coach more people, especially if we can delegate it to a certain artificial intelligence and use its tools. And it's just advancing and becoming better and better, like with eye contact and all those things, or like being realistic. So, like, my number one thing is like really concession. Yeah, it will destroy jobs. It's going to happen really fast, and it doesn't create the same number of jobs than it destroys. So, mine is more of an even if response. And this is where I believe that we can adjust with certain policies that we can enact. So I'm a very Andrew Yang stan. So what one thing that he really talked about is that with technological advancements, it's going to be really harder to protect jobs. So the question then becomes, how are we going to be able to protect people? So instead of protecting jobs, like we have to have a conversation of how do we protect people? And one of the solutions that he has is universal basic income, maybe discussing how people could have better access to welfare or even ownership of companies that even use artificial intelligence to make it equitable. So as much as I agree that it will destroy jobs, there are ways to protect people, even if we don't get to protect the jobs.
I'm not sure if I agree with the idea that we can just protect people with universal basic income because, like, on a practical level, it does not sound like something that you can do very fast or roll out very fast. Like even with Andrew Yang, we saw a lot of like pushback against the idea of universal basic income with people saying they're not even working. Why should we give them any more money? And another corollary to this is in order to fund universal basic income, you need to tax a lot of people a lot more. So I'm not sure if that'll be super palatable to people. So as a result of this conflict, this tension, I don't think we can get whatever those policies are fast enough to actually protect the people who are worth protecting. So what I would say is even if it's true that it can mitigate the harms a little bit, I think that's really far from where we are now. And in the meantime, while we're waiting for that, a lot of people are going to get hurt. And I'm not sure if that's ultimately worth it. So yeah, even if I concede, and I do not concede that universal basic income will be able to protect it. I am not sure that we are able to create it at a rate that is sufficient for us to adequately protect people. I think it's nice in theory where we have so much automation we don't want for a thing anymore. And as a result of that, we can now free up our time to do things that we really want, like in Star Trek, because that's what they're like in Starfleet, right? But that's science fiction. The reason why they were able to do that was because they moved past capitalist systems. And now we're saying that, oh, we can't beat the capitalist system that is replacing you with cheaper and cheaper replacements or automation. So let's just give up.
Yeah, on the issue on taxes and taxing people a lot more for universal basic income, I think that as a society, we're going to tax corporations more than the people themselves. So assuming that like people lose their jobs, they can't provide income tax at that point in time. But if corporations are really able to replace human beings with artificial intelligence or work with one human being that controls like various art AI tools, that will increase the savings of corporations. And I think that's where the taxes can come from because the more corporations don't get to spend, the more that they get to profit. And perhaps there could be new legislation where we could tax corporations more equitably, given the fact that they are the ones benefiting from this at this point in time. So I think, yeah, we aren't able to adjust really fast. And that's why I think like legislation and how corporations then become a part of society needs to be revisited by institutions and legislators and even philosophers, right? Because a lot of people are saying that like corporations are there to exist so that they could serve humanity better, offer more jobs, fill up the gaps that the government cannot fill up. So I think in terms of like where the money will go, I don't think it's going to be the same as people's income tax will be compromised for UBI. I think the massive profits that corporations will get from firing people and using artificial intelligence can be used to fund universal basic income. But in terms of just the question of, yes, we concede in the worst case that artificial intelligence will take over and the harms do exist. I think one of the productive conversations an individual could have for himself, herself, or themselves is that what now? What are we going to do about it? Because assuming that artificial intelligence is dangerous, the way to combat the dangers of artificial intelligence is to be more educated about it, is to immerse yourself within it. And yeah, one parallelism that I could think is a Harry Potter reference. I understand J.K. Rowling's cancelled, but if we take a look at the defense against the dark arts subject, the thing that students will learn is the dark arts first, and then they will learn how to defend themselves against it. In terms of my concession that it will have a lot of harms, an individual to protect himself or herself or themselves against that harm is to do your homework, immerse yourself with it, and understand it deeper such that individuals can really understand how are they going to adapt with the existence of AI. Because one argument then that I'd like to throw out is that the new successful profession is not necessarily AI replacing humans, but it's going to be human beings that use AI that will replace human beings that do not use artificial intelligence, in the same way that the humans that do not use the internet will be replaced by human beings that are using the internet.
Yeah. So first, I'd like to rebut the evidence that you gave. Sorry, the analogy about defense against the dark arts. Because you said the first thing that they do is teach you the dark arts. That is absolutely untrue because they never did that except in year 4 and year 7. And in year 4, Goblet of Fire, the person who was teaching was actually a Death Eater pretending to be a professor. And then in year 7 was actually a person installed by the Dark Lord himself. But that's not super relevant. Yeah, fuck turfs, dude. I would say fuck turfs. But also, what I would say is, even if
That
it's
would be the intro.
yeah, fuck turfs, dude.
Fuck turfs.
What I would say is, even if it's true that you can combat it through education, there are a few concerns there. First is if you are in an industry that is very vulnerable to displacement or disruption like this, chances are you might already be in a position where you find it hard to have the time to research and use and experiment. So they're constrained by those factors already. But secondly, even if people have been replaced by people who use the internet, I would still say that it's not equal because let's say that you have one person who's using the AI, they're not just replacing one person who's not using the AI. They're probably replacing like 10 people who don't use the AI, right? So it's still vastly unequal to me. So on the first level, I would say is that it's not super realistic to expect that everyone can educate themselves and adapt. But secondly, even if they can, chances are the people who they're going to be replacing are a lot more compared to the people who get to stay. And thirdly, even if you assume that all of them can adapt, I would still say there's an incentive for the corporation to just still save on costs by removing people as well. So that's for combating through education by learning the dark arts. But second thing that you argued was we can take from the added savings of corporations. So what I want to ask you is just to clarify, what you're proposing is let's tax them proportionally to the amount that they save due to automation, right?
Yeah, to some extent.
Yeah. So what I would say there is if they're going to be taxed proportionally to the amount that they save, the added amount that they save, then the argument that you're making is diminished. Because the first part of the episode, you were saying that it's an exciting opportunity, right? We can adapt, etc. But if they're no longer going to be able to save it, then there's no difference. There's no difference. They might as well have kept on the human worker instead of relying on AI. So if they don't get the savings anyway, then there's no reason for them to automate. There's no reason for us to get the exciting things that you were talking about. So even in the best case scenario where we do have the money for universal basic income, that comes at the cost of not being able to innovate as fast as you would have us believe due to AI.
So my question to you is, what do you think is the better outcome to argue in running that argument?
Okay, so you're asking like, if
Yeah.
I was going to argue it,
Yeah,
Wow.
right.
Okay.
Because no,
Thank.
I get the rebuttal, right? Because it's just like they're not gonna benefit from artificial intelligence because you're gonna tax them proportionally. So maybe another outcome is that tax them commensurate to the growth that they're receiving. And assuming that like they'll still have profit, but then there's still added taxes. And that added taxes wouldn't really cut down on the profit. I just don't know how to phrase that really well at this point in time. But I think then therefore with that rebuttal, me revisiting the argument, that could have been the better outcome to defend. Because it also assumes that AI is going to be that powerful that it could produce results more than like a collection of human beings. So maybe in defending artificial intelligence in terms of it benefiting humanity, like there could be one way to argue an outcome, but identify the outcome first, where there will be just more room for profit and taxes. And I'll have to argue why that could coexist. So yeah.
Maybe, okay, so this is me trying to argue from the perspective of the side that I don't necessarily believe in. Maybe policy that we can have is let's increase taxes for both corporations and the rich people that benefit the most from the growth of corporations. Because, like, you have stockholders, you have the board of directors, they're probably going to get pay raises or their dividends will increase. So,
Mhm.
maybe in order to retain the incentive to use AI, we can tax them a little bit more based on the extra savings that they have, but not so much that there are no savings at all, and the rest we can lay it on the stockholders who are earning much more because of this. So there, I think, yeah, I think my point still stands that it's going to be difficult to roll out these changes really fast. So I think what we can agree on is they will be hurt. So the onus is on the government to try to protect them. Either way, they'll be hurt,
Mhm.
right? So if we don't have AI, if we regulate it very strongly, they might get hurt because companies are unable to create stuff efficiently. But on the other hand, if you use the AI, then they might be displaced in terms of their employment. So either way, they're going to be harmed. The question is like, what can we do as the government to do that? And that's like an ongoing question that we don't
Yeah,
really answer.
that definitely is an ongoing question. And the way I'd like to just contextualize where I'm coming from is that in terms of the debate that will it harm people or the average individual, I think it's true. Like, yes, they're gonna be really replaced. The way I see it as an entrepreneur, as a privileged cishet man, is that yeah, there will be harms. And for me, the question is if I cannot control what will happen to the vast majority of the people, like how will I adapt as an individual? Because, yeah, the reality is there. Like capitalism is dominating in the entire world, tech is dominating in the entire world, in every other country. Like most countries are capitalist, even China has state sponsored capitalism. So, given the fact that's the reality of life, the question then becomes is what should an individual do with the circumstances that are presented to them? And so, like, for example, in the society level, I lose that debate. But I think in the debate in terms of an individual, should an individual oppose AI for their main interests? I think an individual should like embrace it in the individual level. So what do you call this? At this, the first part, I would say I lose that debate. Like I'm also like totally convinced that it's gonna hurt a lot of people, especially drivers, right? Like when self-driving cars are there, and once people see the data in terms of how many times will a self-driving car save an individual versus a human being, or like how many times will a human being have an accident versus a artificial intelligence self-driving mechanism driving a particular car. um yeah, a lot of people will be losing their jobs. But at the same time, I would say that like people would also have their lives saved. So I lean a bit on the more optimistic viewpoint that they will also adjust. But even if they don't adjust, they're not going to die of hunger. Or there are already solutions that we could use for people who are already facing extreme poverty, even in the absence of AI. So, like, that's the trade off, right? Like, self driving cars will be able to save more lives because of like less human error. But at the same time, I would say that saving more lives is a greater benefit because that's in the millions versus people that will have to adapt or people who will have to hold the governments accountable to help them further due to the change of circumstance.
Okay, so my question is, you said on the individual level, let's embrace it. How would a Grab driver embrace self-driving cars?
No, yeah. So I would say that they wouldn't. I would say they wouldn't. So I would concede that my perspective on artificial intelligence is a privileged perspective. And for the people who are privileged enough to access the internet and access I think they ought to embrace it. And the people who have privilege ought to use their power to empower those people who can't access that particular privilege. I don't know how. That's just my stance. But in terms of like a driver being able to embrace artificial intelligence, maybe it's also understanding how much wealth is this creating such that they would have the feel or they would have the idea that they could demand more from the government or demand more from institutions that are benefiting from this. So, like, for example, maybe a drivers union, for example, could exist that if by 2030 they're going to be replaced, a drivers union anticipating that type of replacement and anticipating that, for example, Grab or Uber will profit so much, then maybe they would have the impetus to say, we are asking for more. And it's not that unreasonable to ask for this much because the future projection of your profits once we are replaced is going to be so big that the benefits that we get from you is not going to be really impactful for the company. So that's the best
Yeah.
response that I have is they got to educate themselves to what extent corporations will benefit so that they could really have the impetus to ask for more.
What you're saying is they should be able to learn more about it, eliminate the information asymmetry, and then do collective bargaining so that they're paid what they're going to be worth.
And the people of privilege, for me, in my best case, in the best case of my world, is that the people of privilege ought to be communicating all these benefits and all these changes that will happen in the future so that more people could anticipate and adjust quicker.
What I would say is, I'm not really sold on the idea that people with privilege should use their privilege to help the people who are displaced. Because the reason why they are displaced is because of their privilege, right? It's like saying, okay, I'm going to fire you, but you should be happy because I'm still giving you severance pay. So you are the one who caused the problem. And now you get to make yourself feel good just by using your privilege to help other people. When in fact you use your privilege and that's the reason why you needed to help them in the first place. So on the first level, I'm not even sure if that's likely to happen because you're assuming that privileged people would just be altruistic. But right isn't the reason why they were willing to use AI to cut costs? And that means they're not really altruistic. They don't see other people as ends in and of themselves. They're means to an end, which is more money. So if being altruistic means they're gonna lose money, I don't think that it's likely they're gonna be altruistic. But even if they
Mhm.
are, I still think that principally it's not a good sell for me. But
Yeah, I get that. And I think that's where the spectrum of privileged people comes in. So, like for you, for example, you and me, we are still considered as privileged individuals because we can access the internet or laptops. We're college graduates, we went to law school. The people who are like us aren't the owners of Grab, aren't the owners of Uber. So I think in the spectrum of that privilege, like the people who are ultra wealthy versus like people who belong to the middle class, like you and me, that's where I was imagining that illustration and analysis or where I was coming from. Like people like Kyle, people like me ought to share the impacts, educate people and have people have a deeper understanding of this such that they could hold other people accountable who's really benefiting from self-driving cars or owning these types of corporations that will eventually use these types of artificial intelligence for their own profit incentives.
So what that reminds me of is William McCaskill's book called What We Owe the Future. And one of the arguments there is we need to do what we can right now to give back to the future. And a result of that book is this philosophy called effective altruism. And basically, it says if you're earning something, the goal for you to earn that thing is to give it to others or to give it to the future generation. So it sounds really good. That's just in principle. In practice, this this philosophy inspired Sam Bankman-Fried, and so that wasn't really a good look for that philosophy. But that's what that reminds me of.
Why? Who's Sam Freed?
Sam Bankman-Fried is a person who did the FTX, the huge
Mm,
crypto fraud dude. Yeah, so he was supposed to do this earn to give thing, but as a result of that, like he used it to get a lot of people on board, but he defrauded them of a lot of money. So what I would say is like that it'd be nice to live in a world where those kinds of people exist. Although what I would say is when you start earning a lot of money, it's easier for you to be corrupted and forget the idea of we're earning so that we can give back to others. But oh, by the way, one of the things that I realized while we were talking was because earlier you said Grab drivers or just drivers in general probably can't embrace self-driving cars. I do not agree with what I'm about to say, but maybe there's something for you if you're going to argue it. Maybe a possibility that you can consider is maybe one way for them to embrace it is if they know that they're no longer going to be able to drive, what they can do is first step is what you said, bargain with their employers or with the company or the operators or whatever for more money, and then use that money to be able to invest in self-driving cars as well and make your own fleet out of it. So maybe the driver
mm.
can be a person who starts a business in like turning self-driving cars into public transportation.
Just want to add one insight to that as a person who uses Grab because I can't drive yet, is that when I have conversations with Grab drivers, a lot of them reveal that they have finished paying for the cars that they drive. One of the things that could also be possible is that if there's a trend, right? And if we argue it that, oh, this trend exists and this trend is dominant, that the taxi system is no longer as dominant. And now there are like Grab drivers who own their own cars in the span of 4 to 8 years. And when self driving cars do exist, then that means that they could stay at home and then they own the car that does the driving for them. So maybe in the future that could be possible passive income. But that just assumes the best case that
Yeah.
majority of Grab drivers own their cars because I also encounter Grab drivers that say that they're just operating through a boundary system where they still have to pay that owner. So
Yeah.
it
That's
will still
very
depend
relevant
on
for Jeeps.
ownership.
Yeah.
And I think with the advent of artificial intelligence and new technology, there has to be a conversation of what ownership could be and what it could look like, such that it could be equitable and more people would benefit from ownership.
Yeah. So actually like I like that proposal. I still do not think that it's a good thing, but that could be like a more acceptable world to me. So I
Mm,
think like making steps. I
yeah.
still don't think that like I still think that the harms outweigh the benefits in terms of the labor market. But if that was the best case and that best case happens, I'd be
Yeah.
less unhappy, I guess.
Yeah. In an area where I agree with you is in the music industry, because there are a lot of artists who do the hard work of presenting their style, their structure, their own art. And then Chat GPT-4, you can ask that particular artificial intelligence to make lyrics in the style of, for example, Ben and Ben or J. Cole, Kendrick Lamar. And then a lot of people can have access to that style, even without working hard for it. And there's a lot of musician friends that I have that are really disgruntled with that, that somebody could just mimic their style without even trying. And some people do argue that it takes away the art of it, or it evolves art into mimicry. And this also goes for a lot of people who do voice acting, where companies will just copy their voices and no
Yeah.
longer hire voice actors. So, what I would say is that I'm really compassionate with people who are pursuing the arts, just like me. I have a band and we're releasing songs on Spotify. And I'd just be pissed if someone does put on Chat GPT, make me lyrics about the environment in the style of Bolo Pascual, and then they just benefit from things that they didn't work hard for. So that's why I really understand the frustration as an artist myself. And when I meditate on this, the question then becomes is what now? Given that this is the new reality, this is the new challenges, this is the new mediums by which living or trying hard becomes very unfair because the people who don't try hard can just easily copy you. I think for me as an artist, the way like I would adapt is how can I use AI better such that there is a Bolo brand of doing AI, such that a lot of people who would try to copy my art form cannot copy me at the same level that I use artificial intelligence. So that's how I see it as an artist and as an individual. I gotta be an artist that can use artificial intelligence to highlight my own creativity and my own strengths, such that if even if other people copy me, they won't copy the same skill that I have with artificial intelligence because every day like I'm doing homework on it. So that's my perspective. But the one thing that I regret with other musicians is that, and other artists, is that I'm never going to use AI. I oppose it and I'm not going to even study it. I'm just going to continue to use it. And for me, them as an individual opposing it and not doing anything with it is disadvantageous because it will not tip the scale of what the future will look like. So that's what I see in an individual level. What I also see as very is also a reflection of wow, Bolo Pascual is so individualistic. And I think it's because I'm having a frustration in terms of how collectivism can make an impact. I'm not entirely sure how I access that. And I'm not entirely sure like I belong in collectivism. That's why I'm always focused on what will I do as an individual if I can't convince the collective or I can't participate in the collective as much.
So what I would say is I feel like that's a broader issue that's not necessarily related to AI because it's about mass movements. I would say failure, or maybe not failure. That might sound like I'm discounting their efforts, but like mass movements inability so far to connect the benefits of whatever they're fighting for to the individual. So it's not super clear to them. But what I would say is even an individual can change a society. So even if you're looking at it from like an individual point of view, I personally don't think that you should just resign yourself. We can't do anything about it. Let's just work with what we have. Because I grew up playing Japanese RPGs, and one very common trope there is if you're in an oppressive environment and that oppressive environment was created by God, the answer is to kill God. So most JRPGs you can play, a very common trope is like there's a godlike figure. We need to defeat God. Because if our rights, if our individual selves being limited by this awesome, incomprehensible deity like force, do not resign yourself. So that's where I'm coming from. That's where I'm coming from. I don't think that we automatically have to resign ourselves and go, okay, what now? Um, the answer to what now doesn't always have to be, okay, let me just embrace it as a reality. One of the things that I feel like we can do is let's reject this reality. Let's fight against it. And maybe if we win, everyone will be better off, right? So I guess that's it for the big societal issue. We can talk about like a smaller issue. Here, I don't have a stance yet, but lately there's a discussion on Twitter about, does Chat GPT hurt critical thinking? What do you
Mm.
think?
For those people who don't think critically, yes, it will hurt their critical thinking. But for those people who already think critically, it will empower their critical thinking in so many ways. For example, it's true that you will have a lot of knowledge and practice if you code by yourself. But if you ask Chat GPT 3 or 4 to code for you, then your vision could be faster in terms of how you're thinking critically on how a website will benefit your company or how a game would entertain more people. So if you're already thinking critically in terms of what if you had a website, what if you had a game, what if you had like digital design and all those types of things, then it will empower you to have your ideas come to fruition much more quickly. But if you're not thinking critically in the first, you just really want to pass an essay, right? And you say, pretend that you are Annalise Keating and make me an essay about the criminal justice system. And then you just type that in, then yeah, it will hurt your critical thinking. So for those who already think critically, it will empower them. For those who do not think critically, then yes, it will disempower them. And I'm all for the focus on those people who do think critically in what they could do for it. And I think the harm of people passing on essays is not that big for me, because I think it's really up to the educator to inspire people to have more involvement in creating the academic material that they're creating. But for the people like you who do podcasts, who create content and all that stuff, your critical thinking is just going to be more highlighted.
Yeah. What I would say though is, one of my problems with it is, if what you're saying is true, that the people who already think critically, they're gonna think even more critically, and the people who don't, they're gonna be less critical even more. My problem is, what's the incentive to start thinking critically in the first place? Because I'm coming at this from, it doesn't matter how good you are as a thinker, as a, let's even say, debater. It doesn't matter how good you are as a debater or how good you are at critical thinking. Even if you're a super Saiyan level critical thinker, I still think that two mid level critical thinkers are better, because ideas, when they bump against each other, they multiply. But if it's just one person doing all of the idea generation, it's very difficult. They get stuck in their own head, their own perspective, and stuff like that. So I think that if it's true that people who are not already critical thinkers will be less likely to be critical thinkers because of ChatGPT, that's something that I would regret, because I'd rather have more critical thinkers, even if they're just mid level, than have a few very high level Super Saiyan critical thinkers and a lot of non critical thinkers at all. Yeah. But as to, and some would even argue like that's not necessarily true. Some would argue that even if you are a critical thinker, if you use ChatGPT, it's still going to dull your critical thinking skills, because critical thinking is something that you need to always sharpen. So if you have an excuse to like, ah, this will do fine, there's less of an incentive to refine your critical thinking skills. So what I would say is, it might create a culture of mediocrity, that people are just satisfied with just being okay, just
Mm,
passing the essay. And it's very difficult for teachers to inspire students,
yeah.
because so far, like, the education system is, you need to learn this because this is how you're going to make money. This is how you're going to get a job. So
Mhm.
it's always tied to some extrinsic reward rather than something that's good in and of itself. So if people are like, oh, I can get the same thing anyway, I can get like a passing score, I can do the same thing that I'd earn money from and not put in any effort, then where's the inspiration going to go? So it has to be like a greater cultural shift towards education, where it's not, you're learning not just so that you can do better in the job market, but because it's something that you like learning. So it has to be like an internal thing. And I feel like it's super different from not just what the education system is doing right now, where with like huge pressure to defund humanities and social sciences, but also from our previous conversation. You were talking about we need to educate yourself so that you can do better in the job, as opposed to you need to study because it's something that's worth doing. Yeah. So that's why I'm super hesitant about the effects of Chat GPT on critical thinking in general.
I would like to say something that is very fan servicey, which is that's why you gotta have more debate tournaments, like face-to-face debate tournaments, right? Because sports where intellectual sports where you can't use artificial intelligence, like you're really forced to think critically. And if you are thinking critically and you're inspired and you're growing in certain activities, then maybe you'll also find different ways on how to use artificial intelligence to benefit you. So for those people who think that their critical thinking is being diminished because of artificial intelligence making it so easy, go to a debate tournament and you'll see so many people who will whoop your ass even in the absence of using artificial intelligence. And maybe the excitement or the process of learning debate and public speaking will empower you to be a better critical thinker. And like participating in public speaking activities without the use of any other artificial intelligence will make you look like more impressive, probably to people.
Yeah.
So that's why debate and register for outspoken courses. Give us your money, Basket,
No, take every opportunity that you can to learn.
and give us your money, and you will do that by giving us your money.
But if you do not have the resources, let us know and we might be able to accommodate you because I have a bleeding heart for people who have less privilege. Um, okay.
And Kyle has bled all over me, so I
What?
empathize now.
What does that mean?
It
What does
means
that
that
mean?
you have communicated to me your where you're coming from, and I empathize with that, and I understand better where we got to have more heart.
Okay, I really appreciate that. I really, truly appreciate that. I think that's it for this episode. I think we covered a lot, but we understand that there are more perspectives that you might be able to contribute as the audience. So if you're seeing this on YouTube, go comment. If you're seeing this on Spotify, send us a DM or something. Let us know like your thoughts, if you have anything to add. And what would you like us to talk about next?
Yeah, let us know what you want us to debate about, and we'll debate it.
Yeah. So that's it for now. See you next time.
See ya.